Okay, what's up, everybody? I've been working on some rockets and fireworks, obviously, for upcoming Titanic documentary, and I looked online for the type of firework rocket thing that I was needing to create, and I sort of ran into a problem because no one really has a way to create the type of rocket that I need to make. So I had to cobble all of this together from like 7 or 8 different tutorials, and there's still some problems with it, but I figured, hey, let me document this. You guys want to follow along? I'd be more than happy. But I'm just doing this so that I can remember in the future how to do this and just document the process. And like I said, there are still some problems with it. It's not perfect. And you cannot do this in Eevee. You have to do it in cycles because you're going to run into a problem. Basically, the smoke will not render in Eevee unless you can try and get it to work. I tried for about 3 hours and couldn't. So anyway, this is a default Blender scene. I'm just gonna to select everything and delete. So the first thing I'm gonna add is a cylinder. I'm gonna come into edit mode and basically just make what looks like a rocket, like a firework. So it's gonna be pretty basic. I'm not gonna go super into detail with it. I'm just gonna delete all of those, select that, extrude it a little, and extrude it again. Merge that in the center, make it go up so that it looks pointed. Again, doesn't have to be super detailed because this is a tutorial. So that looks okay. Now I'm just going to bring that up and then bring this back down. Now there's my rocket. Boom. Again, not super complicated. So the first thing I did, this entire thing was 200 frames, and basically I had to watch a lot of firework footage and then count the frames. I'm going to move to frame, actually, before I do that, I'm already making mistakes. Press I and do a location keyframe there. Then come over here, frame 50, and then this should be set up in meters. So GZ 160. And it's gonna go way up. Yeah. So click I for a keyframe there. And if I come back to the beginning and play this, you'll see that it starts off slow and kind of ends slowly. I want it to be faster. So I'm just gonna go hover my mouse over the timeline here and press V and select vector. Now if I play it, boom, it's faster. But it's just gonna hover there. So one thing that you can do, I'm on frame 50 right now, so if you just go to the very next frame, GZ, move it up by another 100, so that way no matter where you place the camera, the rocket is going to be out of frame. So cool, that's that. So let's come back down here to frame number 1, and let's add in, come into the side view and add in a, I'm gonna try it with an icosphere. The original one was with a UV sphere. I'm just going to scale this down to where it's roughly the diameter of the rocket. Come into edit mode and delete all of the top, because basically you want the sparks to be coming out of the bottom of the rocket. If you leave the top half of the icosphere in, it's going to be emitting sparks inside the rocket and outside the rocket. You don't want that. The next thing, select your half sphere and the rocket, press Control P and keep transform. And now I'm just going to do this frame by frame. and it moves so fast you can barely see it, but the UV sphere is following the rocket. So now basically all you have to do with this is make it spark. So select the UV sphere, come over here to the particle tab, the fun tab, and you're going to have quite a bit of particles in this scene, as well as multiple systems. I highly advise you, if you're following along, to name your particles because it gets confusing which one to select later on. So I'm just going to call this the rocket sparks. So if I just zoom out and play this, you'll see, wow, that's way up there. Okay. So right off the bat, you're getting a lot of sparks, but you don't want it to keep emitting sparks when it's up here off frame. And we know that it's frame 50. So the start frame is going to be 1. The end frame where it stops emitting sparks is frame 50. So it's not going to be doing it after that. Now, the lifetime of your sparks, let's just put it on 40. And lifetime randomness, never leave that at 0. Always put it between 0.1 and 1. Never leave it on 0. So now, if we just come back and do this and play it again, let me just put this on 50 for now so that it doesn't do the whole 200. Now you got a lot of sparks, and then as soon as it hits the top, it stops emitting, which is exactly what we want. The next thing for the velocity. This is basically how fast or how slow the particles are coming out of that UV sphere. And I did a bunch of tests. I'm going to set this at -5 meters a second because I want it to shoot out of there. If you turn it to +5, it kind of splays them outward. Whereas if you leave it on -5, they stay kind of like in a cone shape and just get shot out, which is what I'm going for. Random, anytime Blender gives you a random thing, you're probably going to want to mess with it. So this is just the randomizing of the velocity. Yeah, I'll change it. I'll just put it at 1.2. That's good. If I play that, you can see it's kind of conical, but hey, that makes sense. So the next thing is, you will notice if I bring this over to frame number 2 and zoom in, it's emitting balls. And these are like the little default placeholder thing for whatever you decide to make these particles. And you can change that in the render settings. You always want to change it to something because halos are invisible. They don't render. So I'm going to add in another icosphere. And we're going to set the particles to render out as icospheres. So let me just bring this way off out of screen so it's not like in the render whenever we add our camera in. And let's just make this the rocket sparks particle. Again, you're going to be adding a lot of stuff, so it helps to name it and remember what stuff is. So again, render as, select object, and you can just zoom out, click the eyedropper, click the icosphere, and now when you come back in here, you have objects. But they're all the same. They're all the same size, they're all the same object. That's where the scale and the scale randomness comes in. So if you want to mess with the scale, you can. And obviously you can change the randomness all the way. I'm going to put it on 0.7. That way they're not teeny tiny little particles. But if you play that now, that looks cool. And they do seem to be a little bit too big. Like those sparks are a little big. So again, let's just play. That's on 0.1, so I'm going to put it in half. There. Boom. Now we can play it. Come back in here. That looks better. So would you believe it or not if I told you we were 33% of the way done? So before we get started on the mortar explosion up there, which is another particle system, we're going to come down here to this sphere, click on the shading tab. I don't know why Blender does this by default. I can't stand this. Give me my big display. Alright, so click new. Again, just for clarity, I'm going to do rocket sparks as the material. And let me make this bigger because I know my webcam is going to be cutting some of this off. Delete the principled and add in a particle info node. Let me see just where I can place that so my head's not cutting it off. Okay. Add in a color ramp. And a emission texture node. Oh, one more. Math. I always forget the math node. So essentially what we're going to do here before I start connecting everything, the particle info node is going to take information made from the particles. What the math node is going to do is say, okay, as long as the particles are alive, I control what's going on. So the older the particles are in frame count, I'm going to change the color depending on what colors you put right here. And then the color I want to emit and glow. That's what the emission is for. And the material output is so that it shows up in the render. That's basically what's going on with the nodes. Make sure everything's still in frame. It is. So the age, plug it into the top value, and the lifetime into the bottom value. You're going to divide that, plug the value into the factor. And these, if you ever watch footage of fireworks, like actual fireworks, the sparks that send them up are kind of like an orangish, hyper yellow color, like not neon yellow, but so if you turn the color ramp that way, you can kind of visualize it where this is where it's right coming out of the rocket. And this is after it's been out of the rocket for a long time. So the hotter something is, the brighter it is. So I'm just going to set this to like a bright yellow color. That's good. And likewise, this is going to be like a brick red, almost like a burnt orange color. And then plug the color into the color value on the emission and the output into the surface. And as you can see, come over here. This, I'm in Eevee, by the way, because if I tried to do this real time in cycles, it would crash. But yeah. When we render this off, or when you render it off, if you're following along, these down here, after the rocket leaves, they're going to be orange. And if it isn't working the way that you want it to, all you have to do, slide this color over. So that's that material. Now we can come over back into the layout tab, select the rocket, and go to frame 50. And zoom in on that. And shift S, cursor to selected. And now we can just add in another icosphere. This is going to be like the explosion itself. Spacebar to bring up the search menu. Quick explode. And now it explodes. So I'm just going to increase this by 100 We already have everything up to frame 50 sorted, so I'm just going to change this to start on frame 50. That way I don't have to keep waiting for something when I'm watching it. So if we play this, it looks like poop, right? And that's because basically it's just falling. There's nothing happening. Depending on the type of firework you want to recreate, you can go and watch video footage of one and count the individual amount of balls. The ones that I am trying to recreate are like mortar fireworks, but they're not really fireworks. They're distress rockets from the Titanic. And I went to the 97 film. I counted out each rocket trail of what I was trying to find, and most of them seem to be around 30 to 35. They vary, obviously, but for clarity's sake, if you come up here, zoom in a little, that's way too many pieces. So you can just come over here, change this number, let's just do 32. Come back to frame 50, and now if we play through, you have less pieces. I know it doesn't look like you have less pieces. Trust me, you have less pieces. So again, just gonna play this for a second. Looks like crap. Now, thanks to the quick explode option, it already has the start frame on 50 and the end frame on 50. That means it's not going to continually keep making particles. Those particles are the only ones you have. But it also says the lifetime is 50. I want a little bit more, so I'm going to change that to 100, and now they're going to fall more. But the end frame is on 100, so it's not going to go past 100. Excuse me. God. So, what else can we do to this, really? We can do quite a lot, and it took me a while to figure this out. So, rotation, obviously, because we don't want them to just fall. You rotate a little bit. You can turn the randomize up, the phase up. And now, I know it doesn't look like it, but they are moving. You can turn dynamic on as well. And right when they're first generated, let me do this in slow-mo so you can see. Instead of just moving or falling straight, they actually are moving, and that's what you want. But they aren't blasting out. And you know, that's like typical firework. So that's where the velocity comes in. This is the thing that we had to turn negatively on the rocket trail. Now we're going to turn it up. So again, it's different for every single type of firework that you want to make. And I'm just going to let this play and show you how different it looks. So this is at a velocity of 1 meter per second. Basically nothing. So if we turn it up to 5, and it's now they're starting to spread out more. Let's try 20. This is going to be huge. So if you want to make a huge firework, that's that. Try 10. I don't want it quite that large. Decent. Okay. So now there's that. But another thing with fireworks is when they blow up, they start off really fast and then they just kind of slowly fall. This is going at a constant rate. So in order to try and emulate that, that's pretty much all we have with the velocity right now. So I can change that. We can mess with the physics. Don't mess with I tried messing with the mass of the particle itself. I never got anywhere with it. But the Brownian and the dampening is what you want to mess with. So basically, the Brownian is going to help speed them up quickly. When it first, I'm just having to adjust this on the fly, so that seems about good, about 0.5. And then the dampening. The dampening is where you get that slowing effect when they're trying to start falling. So if you put it on 0.1, Yeah, but that's too much. So they're going out, but then they barely even go out before they start to fall. So even 0.1 is too much. So let's try 0.05. Half that. Nope. 0.02. Sort of. 0.03. There we go. So now if I extend this out a little bit so you can actually watch them fall. There. And again, if you want them, if you think they're not spreading out enough, you can come back up here to the velocity. Give them some more velocity. Make it 20. And now, boom, they're coming out more. That actually looks not bad. We're going to do basically the same thing with this material as what we did with this little object down here. Make sure I didn't mess with this at all. I'm actually gonna just see what this looks like. Yeah. Turn the gravity down a little bit. That'll actually help with the like floatiness of them. So all I did was just come down to the field weights, gravity 0.7. So now we don't have to make a fake object because this is actually going to be rendered. So we can delete all of this default explosion thing. And we're going to do basically the same thing that we did with the sparks. We're just going to change the color of the sparks. So there. So now we have white explosions. But here's where things get tricky. If you add in a camera here and render this out, like if you change the background to a black background so you can actually see the lights and stuff. If you render that out, that's what you're going to see. Now, that does not look like a firework. There should be smoke trails, there should be glows. You can do the glow in Blender with the Compositor. I'm not too experienced with the Compositor, so I handle it in After Effects, GIMP, Photoshop, any of that. But you can do the smoke. And the smoke is pretty much exactly how we did the rocket trail sparks, except this time the particle is going to be a procedurally generated cloud. So let me save this. All right, save. Slide up, and this is going to be just the mortar explosion. Again, I'm stickler for naming stuff. Mortar explosion. Add a new particle system in, and this one is going to be the smoke. And again, just smoke. Now, before we can actually tweak any more of this, we actually have to make the smoke. And I like to keep stuff off camera when it doesn't need to be on camera. So come down here, Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm going to add in a cube, move it off to the side, and let's just name this cloud cube. Now, this very tricky. And like I said, if you want to try a smoke simulation, I tried to do it that way, but I could never get the smoke to behave properly and render. I tried it in Eevee, I tried it in Cycles, it wouldn't work. So I found out how to do it this way. This way works in Cycles, it does not work in Eevee. If you try and render it off in Eevee, all you're going to see is the lights. You're not going to see any smoke because it just will not render. So that being said, have to come over here to cycles, and because I have powerful GPUs, I'm going to put it on GPU. So this is super complicated. I will try and go slow as possible and explain stuff, but this is pretty advanced. If you don't understand it, I'm sorry, but it would take me probably an hour to explain this material to you fully to a beginner. So we don't want the principled. We can delete that, and let me just call this smoke before I get started. So I like to work from left to right. So I'm just going to start adding a bunch of stuff in, and then I will tell you what they all are. So let me try and explain all of this. The node, object node, I'm trying to make sure my face isn't covering stuff up. That is taking the location inside the cube. We're going to tweak the bumpiness of the cloud itself with this noise texture. This is going to tell Blender to use the generated coordinates of the cube, add both of those together with this add node, and then the mapping node is going to tell Blender how large should I say this cube is, the scale of the cube, the location of the cloud within the cube. We're going to use a gradient texture to further tweak that, and then add all of that stuff together with this add node and tweak the value of it. Finally, put all of that information into a principled volume node and then put it into Blender. So let's get tweaking with the noise texture, and you can watch stuff tweak or move as I mess with stuff down here. So the scale, I had it on 7.879. That's about decent. And I didn't touch anything else with that, so that was easy. So we're going to add correct, but then I had to turn the locations of the cube. Every single one of these is to 3, the rotations are 0, and the scale is -3 in each of those. And then the gradient, change that to quadratic sphere. And it looks like it disappeared, but there it goes. It was just recalculating. Change this from add to multiply. And then we're going to turn the value way up. Now, the first time I used this, I had to turn it up to 500. I eventually got it to work on 200. You may have to turn it up to 1,000, 100. Play around with it. If you want to copy my settings, then copy them. But as you can see, the more you drag it up, the more cloud you get. About 239. That's decent. And again, make sure that you change the color of the cloud itself to white. And there's that. So now you have your own little cloud. You come over to the rendered view. Boom. Cloud. And now we're going to do the exact same thing to this cloud that we did to this sphere here, which is we're going to tell this new particle system that we made up here to render off the cube as a particle. If you do, I know a lot of my viewers try and use Blender on a laptop. If you are following along on a laptop, save your file right now, because in all likelihood you're about to crash, especially if you're in rendered view or any other type of thing, or you have the animation playing. Just pause it, trust me. Okay, so if I'm gonna play this, I would not recommend playing it for you. That's your particle system. Again, halos. We don't want halos, we want cube. So where's my render? Where's it? Should right there, right in front of me. So we're just gonna type in the cloud cube, And as you can see now, if I turn that off and turn on shading, it's rendering off a bunch of little clouds. But we want bigger clouds. We don't just want the clouds to fall. We want the clouds to follow those right there. We can do that. So mess with the scale. Turn the scale up. However big you want your rocket trails, and there goes the lag. However big you want, it's kind of hard to see the smoke here, but however thick you want your trails, you can tweak that with the scale here. So I'm going to do 0.75. That's still a little bit too big, so let's go 0.5. It's okay if they overlap as well. It's actually better if they overlap. And again, randomize. I always play around with the random stuff. Now, the Brownian, the dampening, I'm not going to tweak any of that because the smoke is just going to hang there. But how do we get it to follow the particles? It took me forever, and the answer was staring me right in the face the whole time. Instead of emit from faces in the source path, Blender does this default where it's like that. If you click on the source, it'll open up this extra menu down here. Click vertices, and that's literally how. And now, as you see, you have smoke trails. Each one of these little orange boxes is smoke. If I turn it on rendered view, it's gonna lag, but now you have smoke. And if you just play this through, you see that the smoke is still falling, and that's sort of okay, but we don't want it to fall too much. So come down to your field weights, turn the gravity to like 0.1, and watch this now. Now it falls and it moves, but it looks more like a firework. So that is pretty much it. You can set your camera up. There are a few more tweaks that I can show you, but that is essentially it. Let me just close this script that I have. So now, if we come back and watch the entire thing from start to finish, and set this on 200, let me make sure the entire scene is in view. So now we have our rocket down here, and make sure my head isn't covering anything up. Our rocket goes up, boom. But there seems to be a little bit of a problem. We have smoke before it actually explodes. So let me just come back in here before I do anything else. Ah, there we go. I forgot to tweak that. That's what it is. We want the smoke to start emitting on frame 50. That's pretty much where I went wrong. So let me see. Yes. Okay. So again, just try and play the whole thing for you. And most of the time you're on the ground when you're watching fireworks, so just put that right there. And now have that as our camera view. Need to increase or decrease the FOV so that it actually fits in the shot. And okay. Now there, we're gonna see some sparks. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and render this off just to show, and I forgot to change the background back to black. Render that off again. When you have the camera close to the sparks, it doesn't look nice default like that. So one of the things that I've found is if you just turn on motion blur, I don't even mess with it, I just leave it on default. The motion blur helps. And the other setting, depth of field. So if you have an empty, like if you want to just watch the rocket and follow along, You can do that. I'm not going to go through that, so I'm just going to leave the focus object and distance at normal. Now, if you come into rendered view and zoom in, you see that these are really blurry once you apply depth of field. And the lower you go, the blurrier stuff gets. Whereas the higher you go, the sharper it gets. So you can play around with the blur and depth of field, and it adds a little bit of extra realism to your scene. So I'm just going to leave it on 8, where I get a little bit of blur, but not too much. And now I can scroll back out. And this is one of the problems that I told you happens in this render. Because this is always in frame, you can see the explosion ball sitting there waiting to explode. Now, one of the ways that you can avoid that is come up to frame 49, come over here, click this, rendered, turn it off in the renders, and then when you render this off, you can't see the explosion ball, the mortar shell, waiting there. So you render off frames 1 through 49 first, and then once you're ready to render off everything, on frame 50 is when you would start. You would come over here to the top, click the render for the icosphere, and then it would render. And it should pretty much be done. Now, I will say 150, I think, was the end. It might have been 200. The more smoke you have in your scene, the slower your render is going to be. Like, you see how quickly, let me just put it on 25. You see how quickly this renders off? Less than 2 seconds a frame. Now, I'm going to come up here. This is when I have some smoke. And I'm going to render this off. The smoke takes a long time to render. At one point in my rocket tutorial, it took 3 minutes a frame. Or not tutorial, but the thing itself. It took 3 minutes per frame, not 16 seconds. That's because in the other one I had the camera closer to the smoke. So once you have all of your particles good, you can just click on each individual system, or one, depending on how you want to do it. You might want to already do this as you're going along if you've already known about particle systems in the past. Bake everything. That helps it not kill your computer. So I'm just going to bake, and then boom, everything's done. So there you go. 3 particle systems, a volumetric cloud for your smoke. I showed you how to do the motion blur and stuff. I actually want to try and get the camera closer so I can hopefully show off the smoke some more. Yeah, now you can see the smoke more. It doesn't look as much like a elongated streak of light. And that's actually a little bit too much depth of field. So this is looking from the camera. I'm just going to select the camera, come over here, mess with the depth of field. And again, the lower you get, the blurrier it gets, the higher you get, the clearer it gets. So I'm going to turn this up to 10. Nice. And if you want to play around with the glow, you can use the Compositor. I'm not that familiar with the Compositor, so I just prefer to use After Effects. It's adding an additional step where there doesn't really need to be an additional step, but hey, you know, what are you gonna do? I'm gonna put up on screen now what the entire render looks like in my original one, which is basically the same exact thing that I've done here. And hope this helped you guys. I will see you later. Thanks for watching.